Good afternoon, y'all. I hope you're having a great day. My name is James Vann with Vann Attorneys, and we are really thankful that you have signed up and are participating today with our webinar. We're going to be talking about negotiation tips and wisdom in business and litigation. And so if you have questions, many of you know this, you can submit a question using the control panel on the GoToWebinar screen, or you can send it by email at to webinar@vannattorneys.com. And again, I hope this will be helpful to you. As we were looking at the list of the people who are signing up today, I was just going through and thinking how many of you I know, but also how much I have respect for you, given your involvement in negotiations for your business. So again, hopefully this will be helpful to you. One of the things that I know many of y'all ask is when is our next webinar? We are working on our 2024 calendar now, getting that finalized. So if you will hang tight, we'll be sending those dates out soon. We'll have one in January, and we hope that will be helpful to you. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at today is, let me see if I can get this to advance. There we go. Topics for discussion today. We're going to be looking at negotiation style, the stages of negotiation, looking at the relationships, right? Leaders in negotiation, and then additional tips. So those will be some of the topics that we talk about. So there's a quote that I saw recently. It says, "Necessity never made a good bargain." Supposedly Benjamin Franklin said that, right? So do you have to have a deal? And I know many of you that we talk with on a regular basis and help with cases, right? Sometimes, depending on the circumstances, right, it matters as to whether or not you have to have a deal, right? Which side has to have the deal more so than the other? Some things obviously to think about, right? If you have to have a deal, you have to have a closure of the case or situation or the contract. Sometimes necessity can be or bad timing can be some factors that really don't help you. So again, something to think about. So what is your negotiation style, right? So these are a few of the styles that we found out just researching negotiation. Let me also say this before we get much further into this webinar. I want to make sure you know I don't qualify myself as an expert negotiator. I'm constantly learning, and I love negotiation. It's one of those factors and one of those things in life that we all deal with, we all use, right? And I would probably say we all use different styles of negotiation, maybe depending on the circumstances, depending on who we're negotiating with. And again, I just hung up the phone with a client before we started this webinar, who this person's been in business a number of years. And I would say he is one of the better negotiators I've dealt with recently. He owns the business, but he has just a great instinct inside, right, of when to press and when to let up. So again, I know many of you, and I think you're great negotiators. So I hope this is helpful to you. So some of the styles, right, accommodating, right? That's one of those when the philosophy is when there's a lose-win, right? Somebody's going to lose in it, somebody's going to win in it, right? Or if you are avoiding, right, that's a lose-lose. I'm just going to avoid, I'm just going to stay out of it, right? And it's a lose-lose for pretty much everybody involved. Or if there's a collaborative effort, that is someone who's really trying to reach in, trying to find what the other person's needing or the group's needing, what I need, and we're trying to work on this together, right? We're coming at it negotiating still, but we're coming at it in a win-win, right? Where everybody needs to win something to get out of this. Or is it competitive, right? I'm going to win and you're going to lose. A number of years ago, I was asked by a trade association for purchasing managers to do a one-day contract law education class for them. And I thought, a one-day contract class, y'all got to be kidding, right? It's going to bore everybody to death. That's what they want. They needed the hours. That's what they wanted, and that's what they hired me for. And we started talking about negotiating in purchasing, right? And the competitive side, I really found that group to be very interesting. They were not as much competitive as I thought they would be, right? They were more of a win-win. I had lunch recently with a friend of mine who has been a CEO, several different companies. He's on several boards now across the country, and just a great business person. So as we were having lunch, I said, all right, we're doing this negotiation webinar. Give me some tips, right? What are your tips? And it was really interesting. A couple of his tips were, when I negotiate, I'm not trying to get everything I can possibly get, right? It's, and again, I apologize for this background noise. It's our IP phone system, and I don't know how to turn it off on my computer. So sorry about that. Anyway, it'll stop in just a minute. And I apologize for that. So, looking at your negotiation styles again, and this guy was saying, hey, you know, my style is to make sure that we try and have a win-win, right? I don't want to burn the bridge down, and just because I'm negotiating this contract, trying to make sure everybody has a win. Oh, that's interesting. Right? I wasn't sure how that was one of his number ones, right? Or is your style compromising, right? This is what I want, this is what they want, let's split the difference, and we'll just compromise to get to the end. And I guarantee you, if you look at these styles, you probably wind up having a lot of these. Maybe you might have one or two as your go-tos, but I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't have maybe 3 or 4 that you use in different times, right? In different circumstances. So what are some of the stages of negotiation, right? Are you prepared, right? Do you have time to prepare for it, right? Do you get the facts? Do you know what the needs are for the people that are going to be at the table in negotiating, right? Do you know what the desires are for your company, or for you and or the other side? And then look at the relationship, right? That's an issue that we always need to look at. And then the exchange of information, right? The explanation of the positions of the parties, right? The wants and needs of the other party. How do you have that ahead of time, right? Do you gain that over time? Or is there one part of the negotiation where there's that exchange? And I've just learned for what we do, right, is when we're working on behalf of a client, the more I can find out the facts, right, the more I get to know what the relationships have been, and then be able to exchange that information. Oh my goodness, it's tremendously helpful, right, to know, just be able to have that in your head, right, so that you can then approach that person. And I found this out so many different times, right? If I can really figure out what the other side needs or wants out of it, a lot of times we can figure out how to make that work, right? And that you look at it, right? Is that a compromising, or is that a collaborative, right? I don't think it's compromising. It's probably collaborative type style, but it seems to work, right? And that doesn't always work that way, right? I had a guy today call, and he's promised payments to our client, and our client has agreed to it, and all of a sudden he wanted to change the terms. And I'm like, sir, that's just not going to work. We're not doing that. So that wasn't very compromising at that point. Anyway, so another stage is bargaining, right? The back and forth of sharing the needs and wants, right? And it's countering the other party's response. And then finally reaching the agreement, right? So that's sort of the stages of negotiation. And sometimes a different voice matters, right? I don't know how many times y'all do this in your business, right? Where if it's a really big contract or a really big issue, sometimes having somebody else's voice weigh in on a matter, or weigh in on an issue, or the overall approach to it, it really does make a difference. And I don't know about you, I've figured out over my years, it doesn't really matter, that the ego thing doesn't matter, right? If another voice can come to the table, sometimes if that makes a difference, hey, that's awesome, right? And I know a lot of times in dealing with companies that we deal with, we may have somebody making decisions, but then all of a sudden, if there's another issue that pops in, someone else could come in and say yes or no to that. And then that sometimes it helps and sometimes it hurts, right? If they haven't been a party to it. Most of the time I have found that it helps. So we've got a poll question that we're going to pop up for you. We've got 2 of those, but Michael's going to pop up one of those for us right now. So he's popping that question up for you. Hopefully you get a chance to see that. And if you will, go ahead and put your vote in. Give you just a little bit more time. So the poll question is, negotiating with others on behalf of my company comes easy for me. So you either agree or disagree. All right, so Michael's going to go ahead and close that for us, and then we'll take a look at the results of whether or not you think negotiating on behalf of your company comes easy to you. So 38 says they agree, 63% say they disagree, that it comes easy. I'm really shocked by that. I figured it would be the opposite. So 38% of y'all said you agree and 63% you disagree. You know, it's really interesting. We don't have this as a poll question, but it'd be interesting, right? Is negotiating at home easier or not? And I would say for me, it's easier negotiating at work than it is at home. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what y'all would think. So let's look at a different voice. Who has a relationship, right? Does it matter who has the relationship when you're negotiating, right? Does it matter if it's a sales staff person that's negotiating, or would it matter if it's the CFO, you know, credit manager, the VP, or is it a team approach, right? Which really helps more in that? And then explain why we're reaching out to the customer for payment. If it's a payment issue, right? Explaining why we're reaching out to the customer. I think what I have found a lot of times is when I talk to, for example, we represent you to try to collect money for a breach of contract. A lot of times they may say, well, you know, such and such company, man, they got all the money in the world. I don't know why they're charging me finance charges or whatever the issue may be. And when I explain to them that obviously we're set up, or y'all are set up for maybe a 30-day cycle for payment, and then all of a sudden, when it goes beyond that we have a banking relationship that we have to respond to or deal with. It goes into our cash issue, right? It impacts our cash flow. And or at that point, we may have to answer to an audit team or to a CPA team, or certainly to our bank when they're looking at the AR. And I was like, you know, it costs us money to do that. And usually when I explain that to the other side, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. They realize that you're not the bank, even though you're a really great bank, maybe, but you're not really designed to be the bank, right? So again, sometimes a different voice does matter. I would say I think the relationship really does make a difference, right? A lot of times if it's a known relationship, there's a trust factor already, right? I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Speed of Trust. Awesome book, very, very worthwhile. But if there's already trust built, right, and if you have the relationship with your customer or whomever you're negotiating with, and there's trust, right, it just helps that conversation probably go a little bit faster. Or if you bring in someone who's totally new to the situation, sometimes that might be an advantage. So again, every circumstance I think makes a difference. So I don't know if you've ever read any of Harvey Mackay's books, but he's written one called How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive. It's been around a long time. A great book, though. I would highly encourage you to read it. Here's some of his quotes, right? Never negotiate with yourself. Get a counter offer. And sometimes that can feel really, really uncomfortable, right? If the other side just barely moves, or the other side says, no, I'm not responding, you got to do better, right? Now you're asking me to negotiate against myself, right? That never feels good. And then sometimes the parties just get stuck, right? And how do you get them unstuck? One of the other quotes from that book is, never cut a deal with someone who has to go back and get the boss's approval. And I love that quote, because that is such a reality. right? When you're negotiating with somebody, they go, well, I don't have the authority. Well, why are you at the table, right? Why are you negotiating? And so they need to have the person who can make those decisions doing the negotiating. And another one that says, if you can't say yes, it's no. Sometimes I go, I just don't know if we can say yes to that. Well, that means it's no. Just because a deal can be done doesn't mean that it should be done. Again, those are some of the quotes from his book. And one of the other things that he said, and I don't think I've got a slide on this, I don't think, in his book, was the easiest thing to say in negotiation is no. And y'all, I had wrestled with that for probably 25 years in my head. Saying no in a negotiation. Sometimes I get that, right? Sometimes you need to say yes in a negotiation, but as I heard that, I really thought about it for about 25 years, and it still rolls around in the back of my head. I'd love for y'all, if you've got a thought on that, I'd love to hear it. But again, just something for you to think about. So we talk about negotiating at work or home, right? Does your negotiation style change with who you're negotiating with? If it's your employer, right, on your own behalf with your employer, or with your customer? How about with your spouse, or your children, or your parent, or your friend, or the salesperson when you're buying a product or service, right? Does your negotiating style change? I bet you it does, right? Because I would think most of us negotiate differently depending upon who we're negotiating with, right? Certainly, I can say I negotiate differently with my spouse, and I try not to negotiate with my spouse because I guess there's always that probability that we do. I don't want to do that, right? Or negotiate with your children. That certainly happens, I would imagine. But again, just something to think about. And how does that differ, right? I did a mediation class a number of years ago, awesome class. And it probably helped. That's probably one of the classes I've taken as an attorney that has helped me more than anything else. And a lot of it's negotiations, right? And I realized that I probably should be doing things differently in conversation with my spouse, conversation with my family, conversation at work, right? It's just a different way of approaching those relationships. And sometimes it may be a throttle down and this has got to be my way or the highway. But the older I get, the more I realize that's probably not really smart. So Michael's got another poll question we're going to pop up. He's going to pop that up for us now. So this is the second of two poll questions that we're going to have. Hopefully you can see that. So poll number 2 is, my negotiating at work is planned and thought through with a defined goal, spur of the moment with no time to think or plan, less negotiating and more directive of what my company demands from the other party. So put your vote in on poll question number 2, and then we'll take a look at what the results are. So again, as you're negotiating at work, how does that differ? How's that rate in those 3 there? All right, we're going to get ready to close that poll. So thank you all for voting. I hope you all enjoy the poll questions, and hope that it helps as you look at what their answers are. So Michael is he's closed that up. We're looking now at the results. So the question again that y'all answered is 75% are planned and thought through with a definite plan. That's impressive. I'm very happy that happens, right? 13% say spur of the moment, 13 less negotiating and more directive. Really interesting, planned and thought through. I applaud you for doing that. I'm impressed that you actually have the time, because I know so many of y'all, right, you're busy, right? You got 100 things happening. So that's good that you get a chance to plan, right? So here are a few ideas to consider for negotiations, right? Prepare, but how do you prepare, right? Again, know the facts and the issues the best you can. Get as much information as you can, right? I don't know about you, but sometimes it can be information overload. But get what you need and what is helpful. And then the other side is, I would say this: be prepared to listen. I know that's what a lot of y'all have said over the years. But a lot of times listening to the other side, you will actually learn what the issues are. They may not ever say, this is my issue, but if you listen over time, you'll start hearing a common theme of what their issues may be. Again, often what we hear in negotiation is really different than what is being said, right? And the more you know about the issue and people, the better off you are in negotiating, I think, right? It's not to say you're taking advantage of them, but it gives you an opportunity to listen and hopefully figure out how to put a deal together that works for you and for the other side. So this is a great book. If you've not read it, it's called Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreements Without Giving In. A great book. And some of the topics in there separate the people from the problem, right? You don't want the person to be the problem if you can help it, right? But separate the people from the problem. Focus on the interest and not the positions, right? Focus on what people are trying to get to and not the positions that they're taking. Learn to manage emotions. And I think a lot of y'all, at least from the folks that I have dealt with over the years, y'all do a great job of managing your emotions, right? When we lose composure, right, it generally is a sign that we probably need to take a break and back up, come back to it later. But you lose a little bit of, I think, negotiating power when those emotions, we don't manage those well. Understand the other person's perspective, right? Where they're coming from. We've got a case right now where we are really, really, really far apart. And I was talking to the opposing counsel just recently saying, why everybody's valuing this totally different, right? And we've got to figure out a way to hopefully look at it. And I'm like, what are y'all seeing that we're not, right? If something's different. But you got to understand their perspective, right? And then try to avoid the cycle of action and reaction, right? I'm going to take this and they're going to react. I'm going to do this and they're going to react. If you can try to avoid that cycle, it generally helps. And again, if you haven't read that book, I would highly suggest it. There's another book called Never Split the Difference. I'm actually reading, I haven't finished it yet, by Chris Voss. Chris was, I think this is right, was a former FBI agent, really, really valuable in negotiating hostage situations, right? So a little bit different than what we normally do on a daily basis. And he was saying build trust through mirroring, right? So you mirror what you hear from the other side. And he says you use the last three words of what they're saying. Really interesting philosophy. He says ask questions, and I think I've got this in here. It's like, how am I supposed to do that, right? It's one of his questions. If it's just totally off the chart, right? How am I supposed to do that, right? And I hate to say this, I've used some of these tips from Chris recently with my family situation, right? With my kids primarily, and we're talking about stuff, right? And just listening, right? Trying to use the right tone of voice. And then they'll, if there's a request, I'm like, well, how am I supposed to do that, right? And it's really made negotiating with them a little bit probably more helpful, more beneficial. It's been a better relationship standpoint, right? Not that it was bad, but just been different. So he says, again, use the right tone of voice, right? And that tone of voice can differ depending on who you're negotiating with, what the issues are, what the timing of the issues are, right? Do we have to have a deal pretty soon? I mean, that's different, right? Label the emotions of the other person. For example, he says, it seems like, it seems like, or it sounds like, or it looks like you're angry, frustrated, right? Whatever that, he says, try to label the emotions when you're talking with the other person. And it's really interesting when you read his book, what that says. And again, I'm trying to think, how would you do that in business, right? If you're negotiating with somebody and they're really frustrated, I don't know what that would look like if you said, it sounds like you're very frustrated with the situation. I don't know how that would come out, right? Every situation is different. Every fact pattern is different. Does that give the other side of validity, right? Are you acknowledging that in a positive way, or are you, hopefully you're not saying it in a sarcastic way, or I don't think you all would, a negative way, right? But does that build a relationship? I think he thinks it does, right? He says go slowly as well. The more I've negotiated with clients on their behalf, right? Seems like going slowly helps. Sometimes speeding up could matter, right? But going slowly, I'm trying to remember recently if speeding up has hurt. Sometimes I think going slower does help. He says, do not accept demands. And again, that's his philosophy of negotiating is don't accept demands. And he says, don't compromise, right? And his other analysis was use calculated open-ended questions. For example, who, what, when, where, why, and how. Again, how am I supposed to do that? I really would encourage you to read his book. I think it helps. I'm maybe almost halfway through it. And I would say without a doubt, it has been helpful even in business and legal stuff, right? Just having that perspective. But again, I think the more we learn on negotiating, right, the different styles, the different techniques, it really does make a difference. He says use calculated, open-ended questions, right? What about this is important to you, as an example, for example. So what about this deal is important to you? Or how would you like me to proceed? You know, I can see that question working in some contract issues with customers or however it may be, right? What is it that brought us to this situation? Why are we here, right? How can we solve this problem? How am I supposed to do that? I love that question. And I'm not going to tell you how that context of that question comes up in his book, but if you read it and you want to talk about it later, call me because I'd love to talk to you about it. It's a really fascinating book. Or a lot of times I will call before the attorney gets involved on the other side, right? If I'm calling somebody on your behalf, a lot of times I will say, hey, look, here's the situation. How are we going to get that taken care of? Because generally it's their obligation to get it taken care of. How are we getting that taken care of? And I stop at that point, right? And I'm quiet. And it's amazing how well that works. I had lunch today with a former bank CEO, and he and I were talking about negotiating, and he mentioned someone who I won't mention the guy's name, but he very, very active in real estate development and just business. Great business guy. Very, very well known. And he said that he was in a meeting with this guy and some other people negotiating, and this real estate developer business guy said, you know, he said he used silence to his advantage, right? They would ask him a question, he'd just sit there and look at them. Now he had the ability to do that, right? But it made the other side really slow down, and it really made them a little bit on edge. So again, just another tip, another idea, right? But again, how do you solve that, right? How am I supposed to do that? Just some open-ended questions. So a few more tips, right? I love this part about negotiating, looking for alternatives, right? If the two sides are just slammed face to face, we're not budging, this isn't happening. Well, what are some alternatives? How do we fix this? How do we find another source of solution to get where we want to get to, right? I think looking long-term makes a lot of sense, right? There may be something that's short-term that you have to have, but looking long-term generally pays off for the most part. Keep working for a solution as long as people are at the table. You know, I was in this room, in fact, with a client a number of years ago, and we were negotiating, and the other side walked out, unannounced, walked out. And it made me mad and my client, right? We were not giving up at that point for a solution, but the other side walked out, and it was a mediation, and the mediator came back in. He was as white as my shirt. He's like, y'all, they've left. We're like, what? They left, right? So people leave and they walk away from the table. It's sort of hard to negotiate at that point. And then the other one is don't fear walking away without a deal, right? If you have to have a deal, that's one thing, but don't fear if you know what? I got to walk away. I don't have a deal this morning. Sometimes walking away and coming back later does help, right? Sometimes it could serve as a disadvantage, right? Again, every circumstance matters, and the facts matter, right? Timing matters. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you. we had a lot of fun putting this together, and we do a lot of negotiating. And it's something that I feel like we learn all the time from. And I bet you do too. If this is helpful, we'd love to hear from you. And if it's not, we'd love to hear from you. I hope you'll give us some feedback. The other thing I'd ask is if you have topics that you want us to cover this coming year, 2024, please let us know, because we would love to take your ideas. And a lot of times these are ideas that we hear from y'all anyway, but we'd love to make sure that we're hitting the mark with you. We hope y'all have an awesome Thanksgiving with your family and friends, and Christmas as well if you need us. We look forward to hearing from you. Hope y'all have a good day. Thank you so much for coming.